in a live event at the library, as well as online with all of you people in the ether. So if you're joining us on Zoom, you can pop questions in the Q&A section, and those will be, there's a chat function in the Zoom meeting, and we'll be looking at those and asking those at the end in the Q&A section. So today we're looking about how do we learn about our histories in place? What are the ways by which we come to understand our identities and culture? And do we value these sources equally? So particularly for somewhere like the library, this conversation is very important. How do we make sure that we're balancing the ways that we as Aboriginal people know and see and record? And how do we actually offset that with what are very colonial records that tend to take up a lot of space and a lot of authority in these conversations? How are Aboriginal ways of knowing culture and country different from what is taught in schools? And these different ways of knowing, can they flow together or do they need to have separate spaces? I think are all very interesting questions. I'm very excited to hear what everyone here has to say. For those who haven't read Grace's book yet, you're in good company because it's very new. I'm here a little way through. But you can purchase it online from the library bookshop, which is online, as well as pretty much every bookshop everywhere. I'll just say that. So I'd just like to quickly introduce the speakers. We have Leanne Watson, is a Darug woman and chair of the Darug Custodians Aboriginal Corporation. Leanne is an artist, educator and book illustrator. Her book, Kuimidga, A Story on Darug's Songlines, co-authored with Jasmine and Seymour, was published by Magabala Books just last year. Like a little bow for us. Erin Wilkins is a Darug woman and an Aboriginal cultural educator, trainer and facilitator, working in particular with children and young people. Erin is a director of Darug Custodians Aboriginal Corporation. Jasmine Seymour is a Darug woman, artist and writer, and a member of the Darug Custodian Aboriginal Corporation. Her books Baby Business and Kuimidga, A Story on Darug's Songlines, co-authored with Leanne Watson, were published by Makapala last year. And Grace Karskens, Professor of History at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. Grace writes about early colonial Australia and cross-cultural history. And she leads the collaborative Real Secret River Diarobin project. Her latest book, People of the River, Lost Worlds of Early Australia, has just been published. I would now like to just invite Erin to do a Welcome to Country for us.
Thank you. So where am I? I am Erin Wilkins. I'm a proud and strong Aboriginal woman from the Darug Nation. I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to my ancestors in whose footsteps I follow, to my elders who walk with me, and to the children, our future elders, who will follow in our footsteps behind. I'd like to acknowledge everyone here with us this afternoon, both in person and online, and pay respects to all your ancestors, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal as well. The Darug Nation embraces the land, seas and waterways, from the Blue Mountains in the west to the Sydney Harbour in the east, from Hawkesbury in the north to Appin in the south. Our country is bordered by the Georges River, Nepean, Hawkesbury rivers, the Cola and the Lane Cove rivers. We are both freshwater and saltwater people. We are both mountains and plains people. As an ancient Aboriginal protocol, a welcome to country is a very important process of a journey of everyone through lands. As we walk across different nations, our people would stop near our boundaries, light a fire, and the smoke from our fire is us knocking on their front door. When performing a welcome to country, it is a way of inviting and welcoming people to walk with us on our lands, to learn our languages, our stories, to trade resources and to share practice. We ask you with humility that you respect our people, our lands, and most importantly, respect our laws. In return, we acknowledge your journey and our presence, and we keep you safe on your country. I am Darug, I'm born of these lands and of these waterways. I may not look nor live like my ancestors, but my connection and my spirit is still just as strong. A spirit and connection that can never be broken. My ancestors' voices are echoed across this land and on the tips of every breeze. May they keep us strong. May we hold each other up. May we share our ways with the old people and teach those who follow to tread softly in our land. This afternoon we come together to discuss ways of knowing. Having access to traditional knowledge and practices passed down through the generations is the way that our culture and our people stay connected to each other and to our environment. It is also the first notebooks, observations that we can use to help piece these things together. We are still connected on both a physical and a spiritual level to our landscapes. Our stories, our people, our ancestors, they're all still here. We feel our presence and we see them in our landscapes. We just need to sit and listen and watch. Warami, Darug Nora, Bamabadu Yura, Nangabai Jana, Janawe Bayala Gora Gunagam, Nangabai Yanani Mudali, Gubangali, Mubana Yura Nora. Welcome, this is Darug land, the land and the waterways of our people. I invite you to walk with me and listen as the winds tell the stories of long ago. I ask that you tread softly as you travel and honour and give respect to our ancestors, to our people and to our land. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I suppose we'll segue right into it, really. One of the things that's mentioned within Welcome and Acknowledgement of Countries is this idea of elders past, present and future or emerging. I suppose it's a really good place to start. How do each of you kind of define what an elder is and how is that different from kind of maybe the Western concept of just older people? Is elder a specific term and is there a specific way that you get that honorary?
Well, to me, an elder is a person who has walked the pathway with respect and actually helps all Aboriginal people on their journey. The elders that I always listen to are my parents, but there's also a lot of other elders in the community who I have a lot of respect for, and it's, as you say, it's not an age thing, it is a knowledge thing and it's a respect thing. I think the elders hold a lot of knowledge and really do help us on our path. But it doesn't just come as an age thing, it's as the elders sort of learn and work with us, spend a lot of time in community.
Yeah, so it's not just an automatic thing that happens when you hit 55.
No, definitely not.
And I suppose, does that sometimes, can that be tricky, where you've got older Aboriginal people that aren't necessarily elders? Do you find that can become quite tricky to navigate?
Yeah, it is really tricky to navigate. At the moment in Darug community, all of our elders who, like the I identify as our elders, they're all actually really elderly. And there seems to be a bit of a gap. And it's very difficult to work out the next generation of elders to come through. Yeah. It's like we can't just stand up one day and go, wow, I'm a certain age, I'm now an elder, call me auntie, which tends to happen a little bit. It's something that has to come from the community, from the work and things that you're doing in the community and in your culture.
I think to be an elder, you also there's a specific role and responsibility that you take on to not only your culture, but to the next generation, raising those and helping them go through their own journeys. It's not something that you can just switch, you can't just flick a switch and you're an elder. Normally you're given that, not by yourself, but by your senior elders, I think. And again, it can become from the community that you work within as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's probably something particularly non-Aboriginal people listening might not have really thought about before, that we do have a lot of older people and would have traditionally, way back when, there would have been older people that had experience and knowledge but weren't necessarily elders, that role had a function. And, yeah, you kind of need to be the kind of person that doesn't just want to protect culture but wants to see it move forward and see it be passed down. Yeah, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with that. I think an elder is all those things, and it is somebody who is promoting and who is also very generous with their time and experience. It's not about locking people out of culture by any means. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned there's a bit of a gap, which we know some of that is due to the stolen generation, some of that's due to the way people have moved or the way they've been forced to move, deaths in custody, substance abuse, and a whole range of very, very depressing, bleak things that we're still fighting with. But do you find that gap to be particularly tricky to try and discuss with elders because of the trauma associated with that, because of the fact that some of the elders were silenced for so long and weren't allowed to share their culture? Do you find that they are reluctant to do it now?
Well, I can speak from my uncle Archie is a Darug man, and he lived his whole life out on the Hawkesbury River. And amongst family, very openly says that he's Aboriginal, but anyone else who comes close to him, he just clams up and will not talk about it. Because, of course, when he was growing up, it wasn't a desirable thing to be. And it wasn't something you ever told anyone about. And it's something you really kept very hidden. And while, you know, they're Aboriginal people and they know they're Aboriginal people, I still sense within him this fear all the time when he talks about it. And so when I was interviewing him for the Real Secret River project, in the official interview where I had the microphone, he said nothing. He didn't say a single word until it was turned off.
And then?
Yeah, and then slowly, as I would go back, he would tell me things that he's remembering because it's switched something on with him. And they're remarkable things. One of the things he told me was he remembered when a very large eel engraving was destroyed on the Hawkesbury River at Cat-Eye National Park because the Arndells wanted that gone so that the Aboriginal people would have no connection to that place. And he remembered that, and he remembered his uncle telling him about the mobs coming down to feed off Barowra Valley, you know. He remembered all these other sorts of little bits of information that he would tell me about his mother using bracken fern for spider bites and insect bites. Just all these little things that would come back to him. And when our book, Kui Mitiga, came out and I was sitting around there with him and I could see him playing with the language, he was so delighted to hear the sound of it. And that was so special to me because this is something that is so much part of his life, his Aboriginality, and he, you know, the way that I am is because of the way they are and their connection to country and particularly to the bush and place. It's very special, but to see him sort of celebrate that through that was really special. Yeah.
Yeah, and that act of feeling and tasting language in your mouth again after it's been missing for so long. Lots of elders speak to that. I was very lucky to spend a few weeks, 3 weeks on the most insane work trip over in WA through the Central Desert with elders. And the way that they would be singing country in the back of the Toyota, singing country music as well as actually singing to country. You just switch from Archie Roach to just singing these waterholes as you went along, and it definitely, I don't know, I suppose for a younger white presenting Aboriginal person, I can find that a little triggering sometimes. I can get that sense of jealousy that people have connections to country or language, quite similar to the Darug, I think, in a lot of ways. I was taught all through school that my people were extinct, that Tasmania had been cleansed of Aboriginal people. Do you find that is part of the Darug story you have to keep retelling, that you are actually still there and you are actually still connected?
I didn't really struggle too much with that. I've always known that I was Aboriginal, and I actually pretended through school that I was American Indian because of the bullying.
Yeah.
But anyway,
School was the worst, surely.
I was really lucky in my family because we grew up on Darug country, but we also travelled a lot. And my father was a truck driver, so he traded tobacco and water to a lot of remote communities. Like he'd just pull in, and so we'd sit with those communities quite a lot. So I sort of had a bit of both worlds. So my identity as an Aboriginal person's just always been something that I've had and spent a lot of time with other mobs all over the place, living with other mobs in lots of different places. And when we did go to other places, we always stayed with mob. We didn't stay in other, like, white communities. We were always
It's like the best way to get to know a town.
Yeah.
yeah.
And for me, you know, I was a Darug child in the Hawkesbury, and I grew up never hearing the word Darug ever, never knowing that in school that we were the people from that place, never being taught a single thing about it in high school, nothing through primary school. I mean, and I'm a primary school teacher now, and it is very different now. So it has changed dramatically. And you will see anywhere in the Hawkesbury a school full of Aboriginal kids who look like me. And this is the reality of Aboriginal Australia. You know, we are a very diverse bunch. And for my family, you know, they were sort of taunted with this secret, like, you're the Aboriginal people, you know. And you're Aboriginal people. I can remember my dad, you know, saying that he used to be taunted with that at high school. And it's not like that now, you know, which is an incredible thing. I mean, I didn't even know that Yarramundi was my ancestor, because it's not something that's celebrated in the Hawkesbury, your Aboriginality. And hopefully, you know, all those things are changing now. We celebrate our colonial past out there, and always have for a long time, but we haven't been allowed to celebrate our Aboriginal past and our history. Yeah.
Definitely. And did you, I suppose, if we're talking about ways of knowing, and there's a lot of ideas that for Aboriginal people, our connection to country is innate and always there, but did your relationship with the Hawkesbury change once you knew once you'd had that confirmed that was your country, or was that a feeling that you'd always had somehow?
Well, I always knew that it was our country. We just didn't know that we belonged to that particular bunch of people. And my dad and Archie were very much had a sense that that was we belonged to that place, you know. And they had a conversation with country that is hard to describe, because when you're walking through the bush, you know, it's that sense that it's a living thing and that you belong and you're just part of it, and it's speaking to you all the time. And some people call, you know, that superstition, that sort of you have this sense that things are talking to you, but that's what they were like. They are like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
And it's a long memory. I think what people don't realise is, if we're talking even the lower estimates of, you know, 30 or 40,000 years, we're talking a scale of time that libraries and historians and Western civilization, it really doesn't have any way to grapple with the kind of memory that we've been passing on and changing. I mean, you don't survive that long by setting up one static culture. Yeah. You have to adapt to the things around you. Yeah. Have you? What are your thoughts, Grace, on what you've learned in this process?
Working with these Darug women has been a complete eye-opener, and I'm so lucky. I've been so honoured. And I'm interested in the fact that your average person, non-Aboriginal person, you know, you go to school, you learn, you read books, you learn. If you're Aboriginal, you go to your elders. That's how you learn. They are the knowledge keepers, and it's so interesting. And I also think, reflecting back on my own family and our kind of culture at the moment, is why don't we all do that? Because I have interviewed so many people who say, oh, I'm old now and I didn't care when I was young, but I would so love to have understood my parents and grandparents, their lives and their histories, but they're gone now. So people wait till it's too late, and then, you know, and I just think, you know, Aboriginal people, a lot of older Aboriginal people, as Jasmine was saying, have very difficult, painful pasts, and that stops you from talking for good reason. I think a lot of migrants who escaped war-torn countries have the same problem. So my parents never talked about the past, only in occasional little fragments would surface, because they didn't want to go back. The past was terrible. Why would you want to go back there? So it's a slightly different reason. But yeah, I don't know if I could have tried harder, or, you know, been like Jasmine and been more patient and waited. Because that's how you did it, really, by being patient and waiting till he was ready and making him feel safe. But I do think there's a big longing in the wider community to connect with ancestors. I mean, how on earth would Ancestry.com get our money otherwise? And why is Who Do You Think You Are so popular? Yeah. Because it's, in a really crude, basic way, saying the same things. People want to connect with their ancestors, and they believe there's a connection between your ancestors and yourself and your identity. So that's nothing like what Aboriginal people feel, but there are those two basic things still there. So yeah, talk to your elders.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, one of the downsides to the fact that they haven't closed the gap in the health, the horrible thing, you know, all of my elders are pretty much gone now, which in the time of pandemic is actually a bit of a relief. I'm not going to lie. There's less to worry about, but you have less time as an Aboriginal person to not only get through your own youth, when usually you're not thinking about these bigger ideas, you come across them, as everyone's mentioned, they're part of your reality, but usually it's, you know, maybe if you're lucky in your 20s, you start to go, no, I actually want to write down the family tree. I want to do the research. I want to connect with
talk to people.
Some of these big scary library places or these archives. I want to actually start pinning things down. But even then, you've only got a little bit of time, and you have to take that time to build that trust with your elders, because I suppose everyone's families here would have had some of those interactions in the past where someone just came in and recorded their stories and yanked it off and hid it somewhere in an archive.
But you see that a lot with the young ones too.
Yeah.
So they've seemed to follow in tow that their elders or their parents and their grandparents don't seem to talk. And coming up, especially into early high school age, they're not so much shamed, but they're very, very quiet, and they want to identify that's on their line. They want to identify, but they don't know how to identify. And if I identify, I should know certain things, and I don't know these things, and I don't know where to go. And I think it's really good, one, that we've got it in the curriculum now.
Yeah, it is.
So that kind of breaks that shell a little bit. But it's things like the books that these two have written. It's things that the community events that are running these days. It's
absolutely
us being visible in the community now, and it's not tabooed anymore. We're in that generational gap where we're all getting stronger and we're all uniting and standing together. And it's important for those young ones to see us doing that so that they can build their pride, their identity, and not be silenced like we have our parents, grandparents.
I completely agree. In school, I often come in at the beginning of the year after the school holidays, and we go around and we say hi to all the Aboriginal kids, and they look down, and they don't want to be identified like that. But then, you know, once they're starting to feel part of the school community, and you're celebrating them and saying, this is a wonderful thing that you're Aboriginal, you see they stand taller, and they need to be told that it is a wonderful thing, because they're still not told often enough that it is amazing, you know, that the fact that you're here is an act of persistence and resilience. It's incredible.
Exactly. And it can be exhausting. I mean, there's the quite famous quote that to be born and to be alive as an Aboriginal person is a constantly political act.
Yes.
And getting up in the morning and leaving the house is a political act. You don't have the luxury of being apolitical or not thinking about this history. It's something that you carry with you, that weight. But the work that you've been doing with making that public, I think, really speaks to how you're overcoming that gap you talked about, that there were a couple of generations where you would be arrested or beaten if you were proudly being Aboriginal.
Or we've had children taken from you.
Yeah, so has that come up in the research as well, some of that silence?
This project that we're working on is more that early colonial period.
Yep.
So yes, it's part of it. Yes, it was part of it, but we're working on place names, which themselves I think are beautiful cultural objects.
Yeah, so on that, so you've been looking at some of the sites or reconnecting to and rediscovering some of the sites along Darug?
Yep.
Yeah, I was intrigued. I heard from a couple of other people around the state and even Queensland and Victoria about the bushfires that went through that were catastrophic and horrific, but they actually revealed some of the old eel traps and did similar things around the Hawkesbury.
So the Hawkesbury all the way on, the Groves through to above Putty and all that way over up to and out to the coastline above Sydney. That's opened up a lot of our landscape. So over the last 250 years, not being able to maintain cultural practice, the weeds that have grown and the thickness of the bush has actually sort of disguised or kind of blocked the view of our sites or our songlines being able to link up with neighbouring nations. And although those bushfires were catastrophic and they did devastating damage, on the other hand, it's opened up a landscape that we could never read before. And that's opened up so much more knowledge to be able to connect not only ourselves, but our sites, our country, and our movements across country. And our place names can be seen a little bit better along the Hawkesbury. Our sites that we thought didn't exist or were already destructed are actually there, and we can see them. So
it's incredible. It's such a common thing for particularly recent history for Aboriginal people to have to find a silver lining in a traumatic event. But to have this beautiful kind of gift and that idea of fire has always been something that was destructive and nourishing. It was always
true.
On how you used it and we were very good with fire. As you mentioned, the fire stick farming that was stopped because a lot of the explorers thought we were crazy and just starting fires for no reason. It has clearly had catastrophic events. Ignoring one system of knowledge and favouring another one has clearly put us in a position as a country that's very dangerous.
But our knowledge is still there. And I think our knowledge is getting stronger. It's something that we've been telling everybody for years that they should be doing, and unfortunately only now that the bushfires have hit our landscape that everyone's starting to listen. But it's...
And you're active with this too, Erin, with Yellowmundi Fire Stick. So there's actually a cultural burn program happening.
We burn at Yellowmundi. We've been burning at Yellowmundi for 7 years, and it's the only piece of landscape in Sydney that we've been allowed to burn culturally. So that's quite significant as well.
And are you able to talk about some of the sites? I presume some of them are probably not for public knowledge, but are there any sites or particular links with any of the ancestral spirits or dreaming stories or anything that really stands out that you want to share?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we have one in particular, that is the magnificent Jarubin, and we found that when we were working on this project with Grace, all these names that sort of suggested this spiritual presence, and there's a particular site at Sackville, around Sackville area, that is called Durambalua, and it means the zone of the rainbow, or the path of the rainbow. And we have out on the Jarubin these magnificent, huge eel engravings, like the one my uncle said had been destroyed. And upstream from that one, there is another one that is about 30 feet. And there are others along the McDonald River as well. And so we know that this place is associated with the eel, our version of the rainbow serpent. And we have this incredible story from the Gundungurra mob of Gurungach, his story. And we know that probably connects down with our story on the river. And it is just... it is amazing the way that language opens up landscape, and, Aboriginal landscape is not just about plants and places. It's much more about, the spiritual, the physical, and the river becomes this living, breathing entity, this sacred highway. It's just incredible, hasn't it? It's been amazing.
Some of the other words in that same zone were interesting too. So right near Drumballoa, the way of the rainbow, and an active word. So a movement, like it's a tense that's going on, which is typical of Aboriginal spirituality. But around the corner is Wawami, which is, some people love that word. I love it, Wawami. And it refers to Wawa, which is another fish monster. Lives in deep holes, so there is a deep hole there. But me, it's the word for eye. And when you look at the cliffs above this site, and the word does refer to those cliffs, there are eyes in the rock face looking down the strait. So it's Wawa's eyes looking down the street. And further along, there are words about sacred stones, and then there are more words about clusters of falling stars, all of which have that they are referenced to sorcery. They're lookout words. Look out! This is things happening here. So that was just a knockover. And then when you put this together with geology and history, it all fits together.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't tend to have a hard distinction between science, religion, spirituality, and emotions. They were
this
all
particular
connected.
place, it all runs together. Because originally, I'd identified that place just through historical documents and stuff, and the Sydney Gazette, as the place where the Aboriginal warriors, men and women, drove the settlers out for 6 or 7 years. Now, when does that story get told?
Yeah.
When they actually win. But they did. Even Governor Hunter came along and said, we can't put settlers here, it's too dangerous, they're going to get killed. Out they went and stayed
so
away.
Much like Tassie.
Yeah, exactly. But that is the same place that Jasmine is talking about. It's the same, they were defending a sacred zone, the most sacred zone. I mean, it happened all the way along the river, but this was the most fierce.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it is the place where the river goes back into the labyrinth, the stone labyrinth. So it does refer to a creation story which created this amazing labyrinth, which, by the way, also causes the floods on the Hawkesbury. So I think Gurungadi is linked to floods, because that channel creates the floods. See where it's just...
And so a lot of there was a specific word list that you uncovered.
Yes.
Did you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes. I was looking for some more data for the book that I was writing, and I was just looking through Reverend John McGarvey's notebook, which wasn't very interesting, and I was just, and then suddenly this page appeared, which was a list, native names for places on the Hawkesbury River. Now, I don't know if everybody knows this, but most of the Aboriginal words in heavily settled areas, heavily invaded and settled areas, were wiped out. So we have a handful. And I always felt so awkward trying to write or recapture the Aboriginal history and not knowing the names, because it's really awkward saying the place that became later known as Pitttown. And there were 170 plus names that, some of which we know about, a handful we know about, Dural, Colo, Kurrajong. The rest are written down, and as far as we know, had been forgotten and lost. And even that would be the tip of the iceberg for how many names there would have been there originally. So I originally sort of thought, and Reverend McGarvey had actually cleverly put down the locations of many of these names, so the names of the farms. And I know those names because I know the names of the settlers. And it just occurred to me that we could put them back on the map. Yeah. So that was what I thought, that idea was a good one because it wouldn't go away. And thanks to the State Library and the Coral Thomas Fellowship, which is also thanks to Rob Thomas's generosity, we were able to come together and design a project that would get those names back on the map. And that's what we've done.
It's phenomenal. I mean, we assume that we know the archives inside out, but there are, particularly when we're looking at Aboriginal knowledge that has been taken usually, and there was very little fair trade with that knowledge, and it's locked away in these weird little notebooks that very few Darug people would have had access to or thought to maybe look through that.
Well, I didn't know it was there.
And so even very qualified researchers that know intimately how to access collections are still being surprised. What was it like to see that list for the first time? Were there words you recognised, or were you doing what your uncle was doing, playing with them in your mouth and trying to figure out what the words were connected to?
Definitely playing with our mouth, trying to put words.
We're still doing that, aren't we?
Yeah, we're still doing that.
Did he have weird spellings? Were you trying to figure out what he was trying to record?
Yes, but I think it's because they're words that we haven't previously seen or heard. More importantly, it was about walking around, finding them, and trying to actually get our tongue around how to say those words. But it was an amazing feeling. I think it was overwhelming, really, when Grace had told.
Well, I couldn't
me
believe it, so I can
personally.
imagine what it was like for you.
Yeah.
Well, and the exciting thing was I wrote to you first, Leanne, and email came back within a second, I think, saying, yes, we want to do this. So that was really exciting too.
Yeah, I've loved how it's put together some of our stories as well, because I've been really frustrated at Mum saying, where's our stories? And she's like, it's not my fault, they're gone.
Oh, yeah.
And just doing the field trips and piecing things back together has been amazing.
Yeah. Do you find that sometimes in conversations with elders that it can be tricky not to trigger a sense of guilt or shame that they're carrying, that things have been lost, despite it
I think
absolutely not being their fault?
it's really sad that it has, but I think that a lot of our elders, because they haven't spoken about a lot of things for so long, they do know the stories. And that's a funny thing, because if they talk and then just say bits and pieces of different things and you're like, oh, can you say a bit more? And then, you know, they do have quite a bit of knowledge that they don't think they have until you start the discussions.
It's
So,
almost like there's a trigger that
yeah,
allows
there
it to
is,
come out.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really agree with that. That was the case with Archie. He was like, no, I don't know anything. I have nothing.
I don't know
There's
nothing.
nothing.
Yeah, they do know.
Yeah, but then they don't realise, or they start to realise.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
was out with Grandpa and they just
Yeah.
mentioned different little things.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
you do know.
And when you've got that much knowledge, it's always contextual. So, I mean, the example you gave, I've had that in my own personal life and career so many times. You plop the microphone down and there's just dead silence, but you go out for a walk in a cuppa and it all, depending on what you see, the photo they look at, the tree they walk past, maybe there's a smell or a sound.
Yeah.
It's all in there, but our knowledge systems weren't designed to just kind of vomit it all out into one volume, the way that Western knowledge can be packaged and shelved. It's contextual, it depends on your age, your gender, your mood sometimes, the season, you know. So I think we've probably got to get some questions in soon, but I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on, you know, there's these, we talk about these two different ways of knowing, but I think there's a lot of similarities between these knowledge systems. It's just the ways that we respect our old people and the ways that we work with knowledge that we don't own individually, I think is the biggest difference. We don't have that sense of individual ownership. We don't remember our heroes and ancestors by first and surname. We remember them as symbols and metaphors when we go back into that deep history. Whereas here it's about that person and their name and their legacy. So yeah, what do you think, I think this project is an amazing way of bringing those two together. Do you think that there is more space for those two knowledge systems to work together, or do we need to really respect the Aboriginal knowledge systems first?
I think they can work together. In my situation, from my nan to me, there's a big trauma. And when I go to certain places, you can feel that people don't like you at all because you are Aboriginal. So those knowledge systems have to show everybody what we truly are, not, you know, oh, you're Aboriginal. Like, I can feel it when you go to certain places, and it's comments like, oh, you don't look it. Like, it's just these awful comments, and I think our country and places need to remove that stigma and then everybody start working together and learn our culture, because it's beautiful. Like, learn that it is beautiful, not what's going on and not the symptoms of the systems that happen to our people. So,
things that were done to them rather than...
because my life's a lot of trauma, like the whole time through, and it would be really good to have people understand that we're not that bad.
And the things that we and our ancestors have survived would destroy a lot of people, but to come through that with knowledge and strength is quite inspiring, and complex knowledge too. I think a lot of people want a nice dreaming story in their classroom, but don't want to think about Aboriginal science or you know, the ways that we farmed and the ways that we managed very complex countrysides.
But this project is a prime example of why we need to be working with both systems. So we had all this knowledge that we couldn't connect the dots with. I think that we had bits and pieces of these dots through cultural knowledge or cultural landscape, but then without the references and the writings of one of the ministers that came into the colony, only because of that can we put together a lot of place and put together and connect our stories. And so I think it's, especially coming from an area where there is so much colonial history that's celebrated and promoted.
And it can be hard, when you realise that you need something from the people that took it from your ancestors, that you have to value the work that they did, and that it is like this missing piece, but it might only be missing because of the work they did that created the record. And there's a very complex relationship there that can be very challenging.
I think, you know, one way is likes to draw lines in the sand and go, that's this. And the other way is like, well, we all sort of are connected, you know, and those two things really butt heads, you know. So I think that's really interesting, how you get away from labeling things definitively as that is that. Because look at the word list. That's a word list, but it's not a word list at all. You know, it's something that's living and has opened up country and is just such an incredible thing. But for some people, it's just words.
Yes, it's just a piece of paper.
So,
well, I always remember what you said about when we had the beautiful language exhibition here at the library, and there was talk about language, that, like word lists, being kind of colonial versions, because they're on paper and they're in ink and they're frozen and they're separated from country and people.
Yeah, they're so flat.
Yeah, but Jasmine still said, I love them. They're precious.
yeah, I do love them.
I love them too.
They're entries for so many people, you know, and once you explore them, they live, you know, you breathe.
Once you connect them back.
They breathe them back, you know, they're very much living things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to just how powerful and sophisticated our language and knowledge was, that even after this many generations, this flat representation of our knowledge still speaks in these multi-dimensional ways, that the power of that word that was spoken didn't get lost in reducing it. Maybe it did for all the non-Aboriginal people that have seen it and read it, but the second that reconnects with Darug people on country, that meaning wasn't lost and wasn't taken. It was just kind of suspended.
And the other thing we're hoping to do is remap these names and then hopefully bring them back into use, so that we'll get to what you're all talking about, and that this Aboriginal presence culture is a normal thing and it's respected.
Exactly,
yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. Sorry, I tend to just run over time on everything,
That's
so
fine.
you've all been very good. Should I say the names of the people asking them? No. I hear the term mob a lot. What exactly does this mean?
Mob.
So when you hear deadly mob, what do you think?
Mob is a term that we give ourselves as a family or as a people, as to represent us as not as individuals, but as a big group of people coming together, or as our connection to each other. For me, that's mob.
Mob to me is just Aboriginal people, really. Our mob, other mob, family mob.
Yep, I agree.
Yep, I would agree. It's a good one to use because you've got Darug, you've got your family words, but mob is a bit more general. I do love that people hear deadly mob and think of pitchforks.
It's used for everyone. It's not just a Darug word, it's used.
It's right across Australia, isn't it?
Across all
Yeah. One of those
so that's
Aboriginal Australian words. Yeah.
Great. Does the panel have any suggestions for what universities can do to be more open to different ways of knowing, in particular Aboriginal ways of knowing? Going to fix the university sector while we're here?
Yes, please.
Big question.
It is a good question.
Well, universities are trying, I think. They are trying, but on the other hand, they're also driven by, well, I shouldn't speak ill of them at the moment because they're really taking a battering. It's terrible. But they have been driven by competitiveness, wanting to be first in the world, getting as much money as possible. It's very corporate, really. And I don't find that. I think those values are the opposite of what we're trying to foster with Aboriginal culture and language, and, supporting Aboriginal people. So they do, a lot of places do have Aboriginal research centres and education centres now, but it remains to be seen whether they're supported properly and whether the Aboriginal way of thinking actually infuses policy and the way the university is and the way it educates its students. I think there's still a long way to go there.
Well, I think the reality is that,
Beg your pardon?
I think they need to stop taking it from a textbook and to be getting Aboriginal people to teach about Aboriginal culture and history,
that would be great.
and actually take them out and understand that culture is not something that you read about. Culture is something that you see and you feel and you're in. And I get a lot of questions and emails from university students, and I don't think they're being taught exactly the depth of what culture is. They're only skimming the surface of it, and if they're only going to skim the surface of it and not get that bigger understanding, how are they going to teach it? Or how are they going to be able to portray it the correct way?
Yeah, I think it should be at the centre, so then you go out, you know, and I think that model should be in schools as well. If you put it at the centre and then you go out from there, then that is a better model than just sort of tacking it onto the side, because I don't think that works. You know, that becomes a tick box. Yes, I've done Indigenous perspectives. You know, that's not how it works. Everyone has to be part of it.
It's not that good work isn't being done. It's fantastic work being done. Like at my university in Urugili, it's brilliant, and it's taught by Indigenous people to Indigenous people.
well, and there are a number of quite good
they're
Indigenous
terrific, and I think
centres.
the course that you've just done at Sydney Uni is terrific. That's for Indigenous people on language and teaching. There's fantastic stuff which really gives me hope, but I can't help compare that side of it with the main body of what the universities are about.
Well, I mean,
so we'll have to see.
In a very real sense, they're training people for academic careers or to publish. You know, the idea of I don't know, at least for my generation, the idea of going to university just to enjoy exploring ideas, it's too expensive. The debt, you don't. You go there because you want to learn something specific, because it's part of your journey, and it's usually a professional
I think the politicians think that everyone's there just to get a job, but most of my students don't talk like that. They're there to discover still.
So I suppose
So
if
that's
we can get back
lovely.
to that, and it's systemic. The way that we view knowledge and authority and connection is just very much against the idea of how things are assessed and ranked and broken
that's the
into
other thing.
subjects. So it's not just the universities. I would argue that it's the way that European and Western knowledge structures have infiltrated everything, that everything's built upon them, makes it very hard for us to find the space we need for this expansive knowledge. We end up just filling in the cracks or papering over little gaps in places.
Well, it gets back to what you were saying, Jasmine, about, you know, Western, especially scientific knowledge is very definite, and this is how it is and it's finished. But like, I always look back to some of our field trips, and I've seen you three talking about a site where you were trying to work it out, and it's conversation and it's fairly slow and it's very observational, and you're looking at the light and the plants and the water and the space, and even if you don't figure it out on the spot, that's okay. You know, that is so different from the way you're expected to do academic work.
I suppose it's ways of learning, not just ways of knowing. Probably
ways of learning.
Sam, I've got time for one more question. How are we doing for time? Sweet. What a beautiful discussion. Thanks so much for sharing. I love the way Jasmine talked about the list of words opening up country for you. Can you tell us a bit more about what you meant with open up?
By opening it up? Yeah, sure. Some of the, particularly the words along the river, that I think some of the words meant arms and legs and mouth and throat and eyes. And so you see this river being a living thing, a body of water, like a body. And for us, we know that our ancestors are giant beings and they lay down on country, and there's the evidence. And it's just so amazing, isn't it? It's beautiful. And to have it still there in the words, and it's given back to us, you know, it's really emotional. It's it's amazing.
It's actually possible to also, maybe possible to kind of map an ecology, a lost ecology of the river, because a lot of the words are also about trees.
Yes.
And it's almost like the trees are the occupants of that country. It's because it's their place. And there's fig and there's cedar, and I can't remember the names right now, but fig and cedar and a number of other casuarinas. And it's like this country is populated with these trees and these plants and these animals as well.
And they're connected to each other.
And they're connected to each other, and it's just an amazing thing. And I wanted to add that the way we've done this is also cross-disciplinary. So we've busted out of the disciplines. We shouldn't be thinking in terms of this is history, this is archaeology, and this is linguistics. We needed to look across all of those, and we're very grateful to a lot of people who helped us with this. So it's like a whole of country approach. And
no
that was the way to do it.
section of those were kind of Western knowledge systems. No single system
because
actually
we've grown silos of disciplines, and we need to be across them. Yeah, that's true.
Excellent. Yeah, great. I think I even managed to go 5 minutes over. But well done, and thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge and your wisdom in this amazing project. I will mention again, the book is for sale and is online at the State Library Bookshop as well. I'm going to get my copy signed today. And the recording of this talk will be made available in the coming weeks as well. So thank you for those that joined us here in person. It's really weird to be at a physical event again. And we'll give a round of applause to Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.